My name is Nick Grant. I'm a composer and sound artist from Melbourne, Australia. I acknowledge that this podcast was recorded and produced on stolen land, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. For more information about the podcast, you can visit primadonnapodcast.com. The second portrait in this series is of performer, teacher, and artistic director of the Mama Theatre these days. Liz has been at the Mama since 1973, and she's been artistic director since 1976. She's passionate about supporting independent artists and striving for gender and social equality in theatre and the arts.
So, I mean, La Mama is how I know of you, and you've
Yes.
been there for quite a long time.
Yes, I've been working there since 1973.
And how did you start off there? Did you start off as the artistic director?
No, I started off as a performer. But my association with La Mama really started because I became friends with Betty Burstall because we were both teachers.
And what were you teaching? Acting?
No, we were both English teachers.
Okay.
And I met her in about 1971 at a conference. We were both grappling with the issues around teaching migrants, particularly talking about teaching Islamic girls. And we had a couple of disagreements about this and then met for coffee to sort out the issues. And then I went off to England and I came back a year later and I thought I'd really love to teach with Betty because I'd found her quite inspiring, and so I applied for a job at what was then Brunswick Girls' High in Albert Street, Brunswick. It's just a block of flats now, of course. I got the job, and so I then began teaching with Betty. Meanwhile, my husband, he wasn't my husband then, but Lloyd had written a play on the way of when we were on a ferry going to Sweden, and we approached Betty about doing it, and she said we could. But the first thing that we did was a performance artwork in the garden at La Mama, and I just loved it. And I'd been going to see plays there. This was in 1973, and so I said to Betty, do you need any help in running La Mama with front of house or anything? And she said, yes, it would be great if I had someone to free me from doing front of house on Sunday nights. And so
she was doing everything.
Because she was doing everything.
Wow.
Yeah, she was doing everything. And so this was La Mama had been going for 5 years at this point. And so I started relieving her doing front of house on Sunday nights, which meant I saw all the shows, started performing there regularly. And then when she went to live in Greece, a woman called Anne Eckersley, the late Anne Eckersley, was running La Mama for her. And Betty suddenly decided that she didn't want to have that burden of La Mama any longer. She wanted to live in Greece on Ios, the island of Ios, sort of unencumbered. And so she offered La Mama to Anne, who initially said yes, then decided she really wanted to go to uni and be an anthropologist. And so Anne rang me and said, have you got any ideas of anyone who would take La Mama on? And I had just come home from the hospital with a two-week-old baby. And I talked to my mum and I talked to my partner, my husband, who's then my husband, Lloyd, and I thought I couldn't bear La Mama just to sort of founder. But also I have to say it was a cherished dream of mine to one day run La Mama. I didn't think I would be running La Mama with a 2-week-old baby.
Yeah.
But anyway, I bit the bullet and said I'd take it on. And then shortly after that, Anne changed her mind and we ran it together for a number of years. Yeah, and we supported each other through having babies. We sort of took it in turns to do that. And then I think it was in about 1979, Anne decided to go and become a farmer and go and live up in northern New South Wales. I hunted around for someone to manage it with me, but in the end, I couldn't find anyone. It's interesting. I couldn't find anyone who was interested in doing that. I did ask a couple of people, and then I thought, well, I've just got to do it myself. So I've been the artistic director ever since. So I became the artistic director at the end of 1976, and here I am in 2018, still doing the job.
Amazing.
It's a very, very lovely and special job.
It's so inspiring. I mean, my whole, career, La Mama's been there as this established, wonderful, safe, sort of feminist space, and to hear that Betty kind of started on her own and ran it on her own, and
yes.
It's just inspiring. I think it's just encouraging to, you got to start something.
It is,
and keep doing it.
And that really inspired me. I have to say that Betty was my mentor.
Yeah.
She was my point of inspiration. She went to America with Tim, went to La Mama New York and other spaces around the off Broadway scene, which was very lively in the 60s. Met Ellen Stewart, who ran La Mama New York, and came back. She talked to various people about setting up a space, and I've read descriptions of those meetings, but everyone, it just seemed that to her, people kept putting up problems and feeling that the challenges were too great. So in the end, she just decided she'd just do it.
You just do it yourself.
On herself.
Yeah.
So she rented La Mama, and I always get the rent wrong. It was definitely dollars. Dollars had just come in, and I think it was $14 a week. And she paid that rent through teaching, through her teacher's wage, and she raised money in various ways. Arthur Boyd did a painting and sold it and gave her the proceeds to help keep La Mama together. Yeah. And she sort of struggled along until about 1970, when Malcolm Robertson and Carrillo Gantner assisted her in the process of actually getting a grant. But Betty always had she was always very sceptical about grants.
Why?
She always felt really that artists should support themselves. She sort of didn't. I mean, we argued about it constantly because I absolutely believe in government funding. Totally. Because it gives me the kind of freedom to do whatever I want to do. And that has gone on. I have felt very little, ever felt any political interference. Sometimes something impinges a little bit. Suddenly someone wants you to put up a notice warning that people are nude, whereas I think that people should come to La Mama expecting bad language, drug use, nudity, yes. All of that, yep. because it's what it is.
Yeah.
But Betty just felt that really the arts should survive on their own. She just was from that kind of an old school. The things Betty and I used to argue about, Betty also was quite anti-feminist at times. And that again came from her very traditional, very, very traditional values, which she sort of in a way had a set of rules in her head that she broke all the time, I always used to feel. So Yeah, so she was a very fascinating woman, but she was just such a strong woman, and so clear-sighted. So she was a bundle of contradictions, but a total inspiration to me.
And was she a performer?
No, not at all. No, Betty. Well, of course she was. I remember having a discussion with a friend of mine called Lindy Davies, and Lindy said that whenever she wanted to be really, and Lindy is an actress, she's an award-winning actress, and she said whenever she wanted to be really fierce, she would channel Betty Burstall and raise herself up and give people a very, very distinct order. And I thought that's a wonderful solution, because I often find that it very hard to be as assertive as I feel I should be. And so I then decided, yes, that I'll channel Betty, because Betty, in a way, Betty was a public persona so often. I taught with her at school, and she was such a leader. You know, she would get everyone round the lunch table and say something utterly provocative and get a discussion going, you know, something, say, for instance, totally anti-union, and get all the unionists attacking her, and, you know, and everyone yelling, and that was Betty. But she would never even dream of being a performer on the stage. She was a potter and a painter, beautiful painter. She used to be a potter when they lived at Eltham, but in her last period of life, she was largely a landscape painter, landscape artist. And look, both Betty and I were passionately dedicated teachers. We took our teaching very seriously. And that was where Betty and I had a sort of a nice symbiotic relationship before she went to Greece, because I was the team leader. I was her team leader at Brunswick Girls, and she was my team leader at La Mama. Yes, and both of us took our teaching very seriously. I think teaching is a wonderful profession. And I was a teacher for 20 years. And certainly I never taught as a way of subsidising anything else. I was a passionate teacher in the late 70s. Along with two of my friends, we started a small community school within our school. We were given a building, and it was a 7 to 12, but only 50 kids. Very, very particular school. We chose 50 because we could fit 50 kids in a bus. And they were all kids who didn't like school. Yeah. And it was called the mini school, the Brunswick East, Brunswick East Mini School. Yes, so I mean, I was a very passionate teacher.
So is that a less traditional sort of... Because not all kids fit into that standard model.
No, not all kids fit into the standard model at all. And we were very aware of that, teaching in that school. And we had a wonderful female principal, June English, who was another of my mentors, who, when a number of us decided we wanted to experiment in running an entirely different kind of school, well, she gave us the art room block, which was great because it meant it had sinks and all those sorts of things. So we could, and it was away from everyone. We could just really do as we liked. It was very exciting. But also I was also a migrant English teacher, and Betty was a teacher of migrants, and so yeah, we were very idealistic teachers. The thing that happened to me was that I had given up. I'd given up any real association with theatre in my life before La Mama, and La Mama kind of lured me back. I mean, I can talk to you a little bit about my previous life, because there's no hint of me running La Mama. It's a bit like Betty was a goat herder and a potter and ended up founding La Mama. And I was a very dedicated teacher, and I had been a volunteer teaching in Indonesia, and theatre was miles away from my life, but then lured me back in. And then performance, which I'd done a lot of at uni, lured me back in. And, you know, the interesting thing is for me, I have done more performance in my 60s than ever at any other point in my life. Really, you know, I've been on tour continually through my 60s, as well as running La Mama, which has been very, very exciting balance for me. Performing in Corandurk, the Aboriginal play, touring that through regional Victoria, working with the project I'm involved with now, Uncle Vanya, which is about to be part of the Adelaide Festival. I'm very passionate about and adoring of performing, so that's become a much larger part of my life. Nothing prepared me really for La Mama, and that's the interesting thing, that neither Betty nor I ever had any training in anything to do with theatre. I was an army child. I went to 8 schools all over the world, 3 or 4 universities. So I had a very, you know, and then I went to teach in Wagga. And when I graduated and had done my dip ed, I married very young and went with my husband, Chris, to become a volunteer in Indonesia. And we worked in Indonesia in 68, 69, which was, I found deeply challenging. We lived in a village, very, very simply. Just had a little Vespa motorbike. And when we came back to Melbourne, and that's when I went to teach at University High School. And that's when I started to re-involve myself a little bit in theatre, partly through the relationship I had with my now husband, Lloyd. And we're involving ourselves in these massive theatrical projects that Uni High used to take on. So the school production didn't have like the 10 top students. It actually tended to have 150, 200 in the cast doing amazing work with a guy called Brian Hogan. And that sort of, you know, I became a little bit interested in theatre. Then went to London in 1972 and got far more interested in theatre again. But by that stage also I'd met Betty and was aware of the existence of La Mama, and theatre was sort of beckoning me. But it was a big decision for me to decide to give up teaching and concentrate on La Mama. For 10 years I basically supported my running of La Mama by teaching, which was very demanding. I had 2 small children. I taught 3 days a week and I ran La Mama. Wow. And initially did it with virtually, you know, with Anne Eckersley, the 2 of us ran it together, and then after that alone, but always maybe having 1 or 2 people helping me out a little. But La Mama grew and grew and grew, and then of course in 1998 we were invited to take over the running of the Courthouse Theatre.
Who ran that before?
Melbourne Writers Theatre ran it before, and they ran into some financial difficulties, and the state government asked us to take it over, which I said only if Melbourne Writers Theatre agreed for us to take it over. And they did, because they had completely run out of money. And they still meet it at La Mama every month, Melbourne Writers Theatre. But it was decommissioned. When was it? Let me think, because I actually appeared in that court. The last time I was in court was in the La Mama courthouse.
Oh, wow.
Because of a car accident in which I was the victim, the plaintiff. And that was 1977. I think the courthouse was decommissioned about 1985, then run by Melbourne Writers Theatre, and we took it over in 98. But I was both artistic director and administrator until 2009. So essentially, once we bought La Mama, I decided I needed someone to take over I needed a general manager. And that's Caitlin, yes. It was Pippa Bainbridge, but now it's Caitlin Dalla. Do you know Pippa?
I know Pippa too, yes.
Yes, it was Pippa Bainbridge for the first 5 years, and then Caitlin since then. And that's been wonderful. And that's been very liberating. That has really allowed me to concentrate on being a performer with ease. I did a fair bit of performance in the 90s. From about 1989, I worked with Ariette Taylor in the late 80s, and did a fair bit of performing in the 90s, but then really in 97, having had a difficult experience with performance and a difficult experience trying to balance all things, I decided just only to do a little bit of work with my husband, but no other work. And then I got lured back in 10 years later by a woman called Margaret Cameron, who was such an inspirational performer, and asked me to do a work called Care Instructions, and with wonderful performers, Caroline Lee, Jane Bailey, Cynthia Troop, and we did. I was lured back into doing that, and it ended up going to the Malthouse, and then it ended up travelling to a festival in Denmark. And since then, I've worked with the Rabble and with aphids. Then I was involved on this project, the Corandurk Aboriginal project, which is still going. It's not actively going at the moment. It's sort of in hibernation. I'm not quite sure what will happen with it. It's about it's a piece set around a hearing at Corandurk, which is a little place just off Healesville, where there was a very large Aboriginal mission. This is a verbatim project based on the minutes of evidence of a hearing when the Aboriginal community took the administration of the mission to court for malpractice and won. Yep. It's quite an extraordinary case. And it was led by a man called William Burruck. There's that's his face on that black and white building in the middle of the city. A great leader. And I played Anne Bonn, who was an inspirational white fella, especially seeing that this was all set in 1881.
Yeah, right. So an ally. An ally.
Yes, yeah. Yes. And but I had actually been an instigator of that project. I'd assisted Giordano Nani, the guy who had got all the minutes of evidence together and wanted to do, in actually bringing that to fruition through an association with the obituary and urban theatre projects in Sydney, who are working with verbatim, somehow, just bringing a whole series of things together, and we brought that to fruition. And that I think we first performed that in about 2009 in the Sydney Opera. We took it to the Sydney Opera House in 2012, and we toured it regionally in about 2015. And then my latest project that I'm working on is with Bagriana Popov, who is a wonderful director, and we're doing this Uncle Vanya. We do it in old houses, because that's Uncle Vanya was set in a sort of big Russian old house. It's all about decay and impending disasters, and we've played that in that's now been being performed for about 5 or 6 years. We started at Lyndall Jones's Evoca Project House, which has housed many musical projects as well as others. We've done it in Evoca, Eganstown, Healesville, Bundanon, and hopefully we're about to do it in Hahndorf in Adelaide as part of the Adelaide Festival. So it's a wonderful project. We do it over 36 hours. It's in real time, and the audience have to be in residence, and we can perform it for 40 people because we have to be able to fit the audience in tiny spaces. So usually we do Act 1 and Act 4 for the 40, and then Act 3, 2 and Act 3 to 20 and 20. We do them twice. And it's doing it in Arthur Boyd's house last year was absolutely marvellous. It was it last year? That was this year. My goodness. Doing it in Arthur Boyd's house this year.
Wow.
And maybe we're going to do it in Hans Heisson's house next year.
All these projects sound like they've had such great runs.
I know, it's wonderful to be a part of
Yeah.
a project that lasts for, 5, 8, 9 years. It's to have
quite unusual?
It's very unusual,
Yeah.
and it is very unusual, and I guess part of that has been the fact that there've been the Mama projects, and I guess in a way through the support of La Mama, that's been one of the things that has allowed them to and helped maintain their longevity.
Yeah.
Because La Mama's on about longevity. It's no flash in the pan.
No.
And I'm on personally a very dogged person. I was born in the year of the dog. I taught in the same school for 20 years. That's quite unusual. But I've been CEO of La Mama for about 45 years. That's very unusual. I'm the worst paid CEO in the whole of the country, by the way, being in the arts, of course. But yeah, I'm sort of on about sustaining wonderful things, and things I believe in, and so I guess that's assisted in the fact that these projects. I've been attracted to them because they're wonderful projects, and then I've been attracted to helping keeping them going. And in that, with both Corrandirk and Uncle Vanya, wonderfully assisted by Caitlin, who's also been project manager of those projects. Mm.
Oh, incredible! And I can't imagine having that much time for a work to evolve.
It's beautiful,
yeah.
and in both cases with incredible cast continuity. With Corrandirk, the two white fellas in that playing the commissioners, Peter Finlay and I, were consistent throughout. And then there was probably a pool of about 15 people playing everyone else, depending on availability.
Yeah.
But so that was kind of marvellous because, people like Glenn Shea would perform in it and then go off and do other things and then be back in it again. Uncle Jack Charles would be playing Barak, and then he'd be over in Canada and couldn't, and so Kelton Pell would come in and play Barak, and then Uncle Jack had come back and Kelton Pell would play someone else, and Greg Fryer would play this person. So there was this wonderful sense of a little company.
Yeah.
And then with Uncle Vanya, it's basically been the same act, the same performers, or almost, with I think one exception, continuously for 5 or 6 years. When I work with Lloyd, my husband, I work we're a little group that fluctuates between 20 and 30 performers.
Just small.
And Lloyd's obviously the eldest member. He's 82, but there's sort of obvious young people always coming in, and other older people floating off. But Lloyd and I have been consistently a part of that.
What's the group called?
Well, it's not. It's just really the Lloyd Jones mob.
Yeah, cool.
We've always he calls it Othan Theatre sometimes, which is obliged to have a name theatre because we don't have a name. But in that, in his work, he starts with a premise or a concept, and we all build our own roles into that in various ways. So I have written my own work but it's performance art. I have pieces. I have my fortune teller piece where I tell people's fortunes with credit cards.
Their credit cards.
I have collected a wickedly huge thing of credit cards, which I keep well hidden and bring out for my performance. And my laundromat lady. There is various pieces that we've created over the years. But I have never. No, I haven't actually written anything myself, and I've never directed anything really. I have directed at Women's International Playwrights Conferences, because then you put yourself up for whatever they need.
Yes.
And so I sort of can direct, but it's not something I want to do. I'm much happier as a performer. In a sense, I get all my directing happiness out of directing La Mama, rather than plays.
Yeah.
I've been given some amazing awards, which always take me totally by surprise, because I never think I am about, I guess most people don't think they're about, or I guess some people do expect awards if you go for all of them. I was made given a honorary doctorate of laws, honoris causa, as they say, by the ANU. I think it was in about 1996. Is that right?
That's what I've got. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was really for my sustaining La Mama.
Yeah.
And so that was really for sustaining La Mama and working with La Mama. And I guess, and then I was given an AO. Have you got that?
I do have that. Yes.
Yes, I was made an officer of the Order of Australia.
Yeah.
And I'm very proud of that, and particularly because that was particularly given to me for work with the Indigenous community.
Yeah.
That was it. And yeah, I mean, in running La Mama, I guess one's priority, the big vision maintains the same. You want it to be open, diverse, exciting, include marginalised communities, all of those things which were part of Betty's vision. But then in various decades I've taken on more specific ideals, because one of the things that I really became very aware of in the early 80s was the fact that so few women writers' work was being produced at La Mama. And I decided to attempt to alter that balance, and it seemed to me one of the best ways of altering that balance was to specifically nurture female directors, young women directors who were coming out of drama schools or working around the traps, and because I assumed that, I just felt that women directors would at least give women writers a very good solid hearing. Yeah. I never actually prescribed that those women select or direct plays by women. Yep. They certainly could choose men whose work they wanted to, but it really did help to alter the balance. So through the 80s, we went from in the 70s there being just one or two women writers work at La Mama, to by the end of the 80s almost a 50-50 balance.
Yeah.
And of course a lot of very flourishing female directors. It's still a battle for women. the directing side of things.
What's the balance like now of the shows that La Mama puts on?
The balance at La Mama is a good 50-50. It's sometimes more women, sometimes more men. It's just, when you look at it, it's of course, on the administrative side, it's always been a majority of women.
Yeah.
And that's, it's interesting. Part of that, I honestly think, is probably because of the level of pay. There are a lot of women involved in administration in the fringe arts, in the small to medium sector. But because you have to be quite prepared to work for a very modest income. And I think women possibly find it easier to work for a modest income than men. I think sometimes maybe men are more career trajectory, set on a career trajectory. I don't know. I don't think that's so much so with today's generation. But and in the 90s, the cause that I decided really had to be addressed. In the early 90s, I was on the Australia Council drama committee for 3 years, which was a wonderful learning experience, like doing a PhD really. And what I discovered was that there was a lot happening in Indigenous theatre in places other than Victoria. Western Australia had Yirrayak, and at that point, and Queensland, Coimbra, which is now gone, but Eora in New South Wales. Now, Ilbidgeri Theatre Company had tried to get itself going and had kind of faded away, and so it just seemed to me so important to concentrate on working with the Indigenous community to get something going. And so I began working with Richard Frankland and Glenn Shea and other people, to bring Richard's work to theatrical life, because he'd made a number of films that he wanted to bring into theatre. And in that process, Sue Nattrass really helped, because she selected 2 of his works to be part of the Melbourne International Festival at La Mama at the Courthouse. But also with them to try and kickstart and sustain Ilbidgeri Theatre Company. And one of the things we did with that was we entered into a 3-year agreement with them for La Mama to help sustain Ilbidgeri, and I appointed, when they ran their first playwrights conference festival, La Mama provided 2 very experienced dramaturgs to work with the writers, and so there was this sort of dedication on my part to try and see a vibrant Indigenous theatre scene in Victoria. And it's just wonderful that, I also then entered into a formal mentoring relationship with Andrea James, who was a young Indigenous woman working with Melbourne Workers Theatre. And also I did a little bit of mentoring initially with Rachel Mazza, who is now,
wow.
Wonderful Rachel. Yeah. But just basically just working through strategic business plans and that sort of thing with Rachel. So that the present situation with Ilbidgeri and the fact that we've done quite a bit of work with Ilbidgeri is it's so exciting. It's wonderful. It's Ilbidgeri is thriving. Yeah. Yesterday we had a conference run by Caitlin, a little conference at Footscray Community Arts Centre, just our staff, trying to look past the fire, past the rebuild, into the future, because the rebuild, of course, preoccupies us at the moment. Trying to talk about where to now, Of course, we'll go on doing all of those things, but, is there a particular area that our passion, that our commitment should be? And I think... Certainly my feeling is that once we get over this rebuild, there are 2 areas we need to focus on. They're areas where we've worked before, but our work has stopped for various reasons. One is working with refugees, and we worked with refugees for 20 years. And that's sort of ground to a halt because the organisation we worked with, AMES, wonderful, was defunded. The other one is for about 20 years we worked with Platform Youth. Platform Youth was this wonderful youth company for people sort of between the ages of in their 20s who have not been tertiary educated. Yeah. So they don't have NIDA behind them, they don't have the VCA behind them, they don't have WAPA behind them. Yeah. Wonderful group, a very disparate, diverse, ethnically diverse, people with various disabilities. It's been a wonderful company. And it was defunded with those Brandis cuts. Okay. And after 20 years, ceased existing. And I think my burning passion is to get our work with those two areas going again, with sort of disenfranchised youth and disenfranchised refugees. So that's where I think probably our energies will lie. But we've got to rebuild and actually have a place for it to all happen.
Yes.
And that we're not going to be rebuilt until probably about June 2020. It's a sort of a slowish process.